Hi, I'm Craig Duma with PentecostalPastor.com, and with me today is a very special guest because not only is he a great friend, but he's also my brother-in-law. And we have, we've known each other since way back
in 79,
yeah,
78 at least.
yeah, way back, and a little bit from some youth group meetings, but not
Right.
much from,
Right.
from youth camps.
Yeah.
And Bill I don't know if I told you your name, Bill Overton, who is the pastor of the Belding Church of God. And again, he's got a great special story to tell. I've been wanting to talk to Bill for a long time because Bill is a pastor of a church in Belding, Michigan, as I mentioned. And by the way, Bill, here we are. It's towards the end of January. It was last night, 1 degree.
Yes,
1 degree
it's very
here.
chill.
And I was
Michigan.
remembering now why I moved from Michigan. I was like, 1 degree.
Smart man.
And snow on the ground, and
Right.
it is cold out there.
Yeah.
But you have been pastoring this church for
6 years.
36 years.
Yeah.
He is it would be an understatement to say you are a long-term pastor,
Yes.
committed to this community, committed to this church.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is an amazing story. And we're going to get into this because you're not in a city, okay?
Right.
You're in a smaller community.
Rural area.
It's not small,
Right.
but it's not large.
Right,
Belding is
exactly.
a small area.
Okay.
Greenville, Michigan is
Yep.
a few miles away.
Bedroom community of Grand Rapids, basically.
Oh yeah, but Grand Rapids is what, 40 miles away?
Right. Yeah. 30 miles.
Yeah, so you're not drawing people from Grand Rapids,
No.
Michigan. So let's go back because I remember those days. You obviously you were
Mhm.
married to my sister, and you had a opportunity to come here. You were pastoring a church at that time. You'd just been in ministry in terms of full-time pastor, just like 2 years or so, right?
2 years.
Because you had started, and then you felt like God had opened the door and called you to this community, and that's going to be absolutely crucial as we talk about everything that goes on here, because it wasn't just an appointment.
Right.
For you, it was a call.
Amen.
You felt
Yeah.
called
Absolutely.
to Belding, Michigan.
Yes.
So start with that, and then let's go
Okay.
through and let's share some things that over 36 years
Right.
of ministry to the same area, because the average pastor even today stays just several years. There's
Right.
not a long term, although the trend is that way.
Right.
But you've been committed here for a long time. Tell
Right.
me about from the time that you felt called here. Kind of
Okay.
begin at the beginning.
Yeah, let me go back to a little bit of what happened in some years that were very formative in my life. It was a couple years that my wife and I had just got married. Craig's sister and I had just got married, and we moved to Cleveland and went to the Church of God School of Theology. And I'll be real honest, those 2 years, my undergrad was in education, and I felt the call just before I left Lee and came to Michigan, got involved in ministry, began to work in the youth ministry at a church in Grand Ledge, Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And I met Craig's sister. Craig introduced me to his sister, Sharon. And so I owe him big time. Sharon has been such a huge part of my ministry. It's just crazy. She is one of the most wonderful, supportive people I've ever met in my life.
I guess I should put it this way: Bill's still talking to me. So
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah. I owe Craig. I owe him big time. So,
Well,
but anyway, we was at the School of Theology my first 2 years of marriage, and went to the School of Theology. And I just want to share a couple things that happened. I had a class with Dr. Chris Thomas on the early church. And I wrote a paper for this class on the itinerant prophets. And then we had to present our papers to the class, right? And so Dr. Thomas called me up and I began to present my paper. And I made a statement, and I probably didn't make a lot of friends that day, but I said that there were a lot of Church of God pastors that have begun to think that they're itinerant prophets. They just kind of move from place to place quickly and are there for a year or two and then move. And
Now,
I said,
just to put that in context, at the time, this
Right.
was a very true thing. I mean, the average pastoral stay was 18 months.
correct, a
18
year and a
months.
half. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
And
Yeah.
so that's the context that you're giving this presentation
Yeah.
in 40 years ago, essentially.
Right, yeah, 40 years ago. And there were people that were pretty upset that I was making this statement. And, but for me, it truly was where my heart was. My heart was, is I didn't want to go pastor somewhere for a couple years, move to a bigger, better thing, you know. I wanted to go somewhere and make it mine, if you will. Make it God's, obviously it is God's, but at the same time, this was going to be my home. This was going to be my family. This is where we were going to live and do our ministry. And so my daughter was born in 1984, just before we left the School of Theology, just like 3 or 4 months before we moved back to Michigan. And I remember distinctly kneeling beside the bed with my newborn daughter laying on the bed, and I was talking with God, and I said, God, I don't want, when she goes to school, I don't want to be moving all over the place. I want to be somewhere where we can put down some roots and where we can, you know, live our lives, and that she won't have to be moving all over. We had a son later on that he became a part of this too. But anyway, I still remember the day that I was spoke to by my district overseer, the district overseer of the church here in Belding. We were at Family Life Center Church of God here in Belding, Michigan. And the district overseer said, Bill, I think I have someone somewhere for you to go. I really believe. And I felt a tug immediately when he spoke to me. And short time later, within just a matter of months, not even 2 months, we were here in Belding. July 27th, 1986 was our first Sunday in Belding, Michigan. And my daughter was 2, my son was 10 months old, and here we were.
Now, Bill, when you
Yeah.
and when you came here,
Yeah.
you know, and I remember this. So I mean, I want to put, you know, when you came here, you came, and first of all, I'm not going to talk about the house, but they talked about a parsonage that you were going to have, and that was a disaster. Okay, well, we'll just leave it with that. We'll just say
Okay.
it was
Right.
I mean, unless you want to talk about that, but
No, we won't go.
but that was a disaster.
Yeah.
And actually not a good situation. But you still, I mean, you took that. But the church, when you went to the church was literally 4 walls.
Mm-hmm.
The walls were held together with a cable
A cable ran
cable
through the
across
wall.
it.
Right.
and it sat on a small lot with maybe 10 feet on each side
Right.
of the building.
No parking.
No parking in a small area. And so this was not, I just want to point this out because I'm still amazed at God's calling on your life and what you did, because you didn't blink an eye at that. This was not a situation where you were called to some magnificent building,
Right.
okay?
For sure.
So that's what you walked into.
Right. Right, Craig.
Yeah, so I'm
did.
sorry, you might have been going to talk about that, but I didn't want to, you know, when they talked about setting you here, the overseer, it wasn't like the overseer, and I'm not saying that, it wasn't like he said, oh, we've got a gem here for you.
Right.
You know, I mean, so you walked into to a situation where walked into a situation where God's calling. I mean, it was such that you didn't get here and say, I'm not doing this.
Yeah. I'm not going to raise my family here.
Yeah.
And really, it was with a great deal of excitement when we got here. There was just something special about Belding, Michigan. And Craig's correct. The aesthetics, if you will, weren't the best. It wasn't the most beautiful places we've ever been, and it left some things to be desired. But yet, God is so faithful, and God has blessed us so much. And I owe an awful lot to a lot of people that have prayed for me most of my life, and I am extremely thankful. People I've known since a boy, probably, that I know that have prayed and cared for me, and boy, meant a huge difference. So anyway, we get to Belding, and I start substitute teaching to compensate my salary. And directly across the street from the church was the Belding Middle School. And so I did a lot of subbing in the Belding Middle School, which was an interesting dynamic because it was like right directly out the front door of the church was Belding Middle School. And to me, it became this extremely real situation. This is where we're going to do ministry. This is where we're going to live. This is our town, Belding, Michigan. My kids were little, but my wife and I both had made up our minds. This is somewhere we want to be. We want to do ministry here. And anyway, we started some little children's clubs.
Bill, let me interrupt you just for a second.
Yeah.
What was when you came, I'm trying to remember back, it was just a handful of people, but how many people showed up on the first Sunday?
On the first Sunday, there was 40 people here.
Oh, there was that many, okay.
Yeah, there was that many. There was 40 people. And all of a sudden, God urged us to start children's ministries in this little dinky building. I'm sorry, I don't mean to make it, I'm not trying to, but I think you're really oversizing it. It was a pretty small building. It really was. It was pretty small. And on Wednesday nights, our family training hour, we would have kids clubs, right? And we would have as many as 100 kids coming to these kids clubs. They were everywhere. They were crawling out the windows. It was just wild. Running all over the yard. Everybody in Belding knew that there was something going on at that church, and they didn't know what it was, but there was something going on. Anyway, we had probably as many as 100 children, between teenagers, younger children, adolescents, and even young, real little kids. God had blessed, and we was just so happy and so blessed, and moved.
It's interesting that you say that because I kind of painted that picture, and it's true. But when you got here, the Lord was obviously calling you, and that never became a hindrance. I don't think, looking back, I remember that really didn't play on your thinking at all. What was amazing to me, something that I wouldn't have done, but you did. Instead of get there and go, wow, what did I get myself into?
Yeah.
You actually looked at, here's what, it seems to me like this is what happened. You looked at the potential. You looked right across the road, and you weren't thinking about this building. You were thinking about people.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely. It's always about people.
It's always about people. And so you looked across the road and said, and so instead of me grumbling about what this is here, you're going, wow, what an opportunity.
Right.
So that's an amazing, so I just, and I know I don't want you to think just I'm patting you on the back because you're my brother-in-law and everything, but I've always been amazed at that you just said, and there was never hesitation. Just like, wow, what can we do here? And you did reach out to those kids. That was the first thing. It was actually an amazing thing.
Reach out to the children in the city here in Belding.
Yeah,
we live in a town of probably about 8,000 people, and I just love Belding. Belding is my heart. It really is. And we've been here now almost 36 years. But it started with those kids clubs. And man, how God blessed. And God blessed my own children in the midst of being a blessing to the children of our community. it gave them an opportunity to integrate here in Belding and become part of the community. And, you know, I remember when I went back to grad school, but I remember I had some classes with F.J. May, and I will never forget Dr. May, and I will never forget how he ministered to me many times. But he talked about when you go to a church, you need to make that church and that town yours. And when you walk through that town, it's not some strange place. It's home. It's where you are. It's where you're doing ministry. And so now there's been 36 years that have taken place, and we've built a building. We built in 1998, we moved into a building just a little bit outside of town, still in the Belding area, and on 5 acres. And I feel like a beautiful building that God has blessed us with, and it's just been wonderful. It's been a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Well, let's back up a little here.
Okay,
because
sure.
That's true. It's been a wonderful thing. But as talking about long-term past, it has not all been wonderful.
No, it has not.
So here's the deal. If you're here 36 years,
right?
You know, we can look today and we can say it's wonderful.
Right.
But you and I know that it's not. I mean, just like when I was pastoring, I had 20. I could say it was wonderful years, but there was 3 years out of that. Let's say that I had 17 wonderful years. That 3 of them were really rough. Okay, really bad. Okay.
Yeah.
So in this, let's not. I mean, you hit a Michigan recession that was unlike. Now, you and I both grew up in Michigan, and we know the Michigan economy. It's been cyclical and everything. But we hit something in 2008 to 2012 that we had never seen before.
That was crazy.
Okay, and it was my downfall. I mean, I had started a Christian school in this. I mean, everything. I mean, it was. I mean, you know, like before I always joke around, but I mean, before I could have raised $200,000 in my sleep. That hit, and there was no money was dried up across the board, and especially for churches and schools, of which we were both. You had some tremendous difficulties, and you worked through that. And there's some other things here too, but let's talk about this, because I think that a lot of times with what was going on here, there were some times that you felt, or at least Sharon did, your wife, she'd be honest about this, said, hey, let's pack it up. This is we're not going to make it, right?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
let's go back and talk about some of those times. Things that are thriving in Belding, at your original building. I don't mean to talk here, but they were thriving. So you move out here, everything's good, and you get going. The church is growing. You've got just a good group of people serving the Lord.
Amen.
And then it's like, and you'd been here by that time quite a few years. And all of a sudden,
been here at that time almost 20 years.
Yep. And then it all hits the fan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's just share. Because we don't want to sugarcoat this. We're talking about long term. And you're a long-term pastor, but it's not because you've had uninterrupted, pleasurable times.
Absolutely.
You had to know that you were called here.
Yeah.
Because you did. In fact, if that had been me, again, I'm going back to me, I'd have chucked it in. And but share some of when it starts hit the wall, and all of a sudden things change because industry around here starts shutting down.
Right.
People start moving away.
Yes, absolutely. At that time, Craig's talking about exactly the right dates. 2008 probably was the time. The biggest company in our area was in Greenville, Michigan. It was called White Consolidated Company. They shut down. Probably put about 15,000 people in our community out of work. And everything, all of a sudden, you just started seeing for sale signs going up everywhere. Everybody was getting out of Dodge. I mean, It was like a wasteland for a little while. It
They were,
really,
people weren't
truly
even waiting
was.
to sell their homes. They were just leaving them and
They
headed
were
south.
just leaving.
Yep.
Yeah, they just wanted out of here.
Yep.
And you know, I'll be honest with you. I love building, but those were extremely trying times. Don't ever think, you know, some people have this mistaken perception that the ministry is this glamorous thing. Let me tell you what, a lot of times it's blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of tears. I can distinctly remember, Craig, sitting in a meeting with the whole church, trying to figure out if we should keep this building or sell it. Because
And the whole church by that time was half your congregation.
Yeah.
People had moved.
Yeah.
So,
a lot of people had
yep.
left. And money in our area, I don't mean to be drastic, but money had dried up. I mean, there was very little money to be had. And boy, it took a toll. It took a toll on me. It really did. It was difficult. And I can't tell you how many times I would say to Sharon, you know, maybe I should just go back to teaching school, you know. But we endured and we persevered. And man, I still love building. I wasn't going anywhere else. I wanted to live in this community. I loved my town. As difficult as things were and as tough as things were, I just loved this community. And anyway, yeah, I distinctly remember. I remember one particularly a time we met with the entire church body after service on a Sunday, and we just said, do we sell? What do we do? What in the world do we do? And it was traumatic.
That was
because, you know, I'd worked, if you will, very hard to get us in this new building. Now, all of a sudden, there's this horrible downturn in our community, and it was like all of those years of working and putting it together, and now I'm going to sell it, you know?
And Bill, this isn't something, when people hear this, they have to remember, this is not something that's just a several month thing where you faith it out, you tough it out. I believe God, I believe, you know.
Yeah.
Nothing, and I'm not trying to download faith, don't get me wrong.
I know that, Greg.
But it wasn't like that. You're talking about, there was a several year process.
Yeah,
this was not solved in 3 months or 6 months. This was basically, if I remember right, I would say that you guys held in there, and at some points, I think you were self-financing this place. I mean, and I'm not trying to give you great applause on that. I'm just saying that there was times when I know that you guys sacrificed tremendously just to keep it going, and so this wasn't just like, okay, we're gonna tough it out and it'll all get solved. I mean, you were called for a long haul, and you stayed and stayed and stayed when it was bleak, and for a couple of years. I think it was about 3 years.
It might have been more than 3
years. Might have been
Craig,
3
to
years.
be honest. But you know, one of the things that in my mind, and I'm certainly not here to cry the blues because I'm a very blessed man today.
No, you started out by saying everything was wonderful.
I am an extremely blessed person. But I remember it was the Sunday before Christmas. And my wife and I walked into the office after service that Sunday morning, and our church clerk, who was a very dear friend of ours, looked at us with tears in his eyes. And he said, I'm really sorry, guys. There's absolutely no money for you guys today. We have nothing. We can't give you a check. Now, this is Sunday before Christmas, you know, and man, I tell you, you know, it will, if you're not, it'll shake your faith, and you've got to say, okay, is this just about money? But we persevered, and Sharon stood right there with me toe to toe and faced a lot of adversity, a lot of personal financial adversity, very much so. And all of a sudden, just when you think it was about time to cash it in, things began to happen. Families begin to start coming into the church. And honestly, to this day, I still don't know where the money came from. Things were improving, yes. Things were starting to get better. You know, and back to the problems,
Mm-hmm.
Michigan was extremely hard hit during this time.
Yeah.
But our area was even, I would dare say, more so than a lot of the areas in Michigan hit, because we'd lost our industry. We'd lost a lot of the employment was gone and dried up. And
at that time, even the employment, even the companies that some people were driving into Grand Rapids closed down and moved.
Right.
Just closed down.
Right.
I mean, literally all around this area. It was not just
Very
Detroit. We're used to Detroit cratering, but it wasn't just Detroit.
You know, some of the people would drive to Lansing, which was like an hour away, to Oldsmobile. Oldsmobile went.
Yep.
They were gone. There's just on and on I can tell you of things that were just, it was pretty devastating. But now, down the road, this is probably about 2015 maybe, so I'm talking like 6-7 years later.
And so, but during this time, you know that God is still, I mean, now I know that you have wavering faith.
Yeah.
You know that God has called you here. Now sometimes you're thinking, right. I don't care whether He's called me here. I think I might leave.
Yeah, called me or not.
But you knew that He had called you here, and that's really that's what kept you here.
Absolutely.
And so I mean, you heard from God and you knew, which is, I just want to go back this long term. That's what you have to know. You have to know that God has called you to that, and so you stayed here, and you suffered. The community suffered, and you suffered.
Yeah, and that's a great point that you just made. Yeah, I was struggling. I was struggling financially. The church was struggling financially. But you know what? Everyone in this area at that time was struggling financially. It wasn't foreign. It wasn't like I was the Lone Ranger.
Right.
Everybody was going through a difficult time. And I love the people of Belting, Michigan. To this day, I can't thank God enough for allowing me to come to Belting, Michigan. But as I said, like probably about 2015, all of a sudden, there was this huge turn, and people began to come into the church. And I remember, I cannot tell you how many times, Craig, I looked at Sharon and said, how in the world is this possible? How did this money come in like this? Where did this come from? Mm-hmm. You know, it don't make no sense. How was it that a year, 2 years, 3 years ago, we were at a point where we were destitute and we were getting ready to sell the building? How in the world did this happen? And all I can tell you is that God is always faithful.
Yeah.
God always honors those that are willing to faithfully follow after Him.
Yeah, and there was not. It was almost like, I don't want to overplay the Job thing, but in one sense, it was almost like that, because you weathered the storm, so to speak. You kept your commitment. You made your commitment. You stood upon the promises. You stayed here. You believed if He didn't. It was, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Mm-hmm. But you stuck it out here. You continued to minister. Every Sunday, you were here with a sermon. Every Sunday, you were here with a worship. Of course, at that time, it was a pretty small worship thing. But even if it was Sharon, every year you were here with the doors open. And you were prepared. You didn't send it in by mail. I mean, you were here. You had put time. You continued to minister to this community here and then outside, because you guys do a lot of work outside that maybe people don't realize in the community. And at that time, you did a lot with the schools, because you had been a teacher, subbed in, did a lot of that work. And so God, that faithfulness, then it was like God gave you a double portion. It was like what you had to start with, and then when you came through it, it was like it was almost your congregation almost doubled. your finances,
Absolutely.
your finances
Finances
went way
triple,
up,
probably.
triple.
Quadruple.
I mean, all of a
sometimes.
sudden you're looking around, because I remember calling, because I'm expecting you to. I remember one time I called Sharon, and I was expecting her to say, almost, to be honest with you, about that time, I was expecting her to say, we're gonna pack it in, and instead, she says, Craig, you're not gonna believe it. People started coming. Our finances are in. I'm like, what? That was quick. I mean, it was literally, it was fast.
Yeah.
Everything turned
it went
around.
From dark to bright sunlight.
And everything took off. And so, and then you went on, and I'm going to do it. Well, I'll stop there, because I want to fast forward to I want to talk eventually about COVID. But let's, so from there, all of a sudden you've got people come in, and not only that, but I'm not, every person is valid, but you had some people come in that immediately made a commitment to the church on levels that you had never seen before.
Right. Yep. Didn't know them. Had never seen them before.
Yeah.
And they walk in our door, and all of a sudden they're like, this is our church now. This is where we're going to go. And we love this church, and we love this church family. And I want to share how God has blessed me. As I mentioned, back when we first came here, my daughter was 2, my son was 10 months old. They have begun raising their families now in Belding, Michigan. They live right with us, basically. I mean, we're all within, just a few miles of each other. But my daughter is the missions rep at the church. Huge involvement in missions. And my son is very involved in the youth ministry, and every Sunday night gets the teenagers together, and they get involved in youth and ministry there. And so they're very involved in the ministry of this church. And I know beyond any shadow of a doubt that God always blesses faithfulness. Now, one thing I want to point out too, when the money began to come in, I have a board here at this church that has a heart to give. We have a heart to give to missions, and we have a heart to give in benevolence. And sometimes it absolutely amazes me how that we've been able to bless families in our area with benevolence, if you will, gifts of thousands of dollars sometimes, just to help them.
It's amazing, because we think of so many times we think of success only in terms of how large is your church.
Yeah.
As pastors, we're really guilty of going by numbers. And I'm a numbers guy. That's
my phone ringing in the office.
This is an informal conversation.
Yeah, right. We're just talking.
I've been wanting to talk to Bill about this for a long time, so you'll just kind of have to overlook the phone that's ringing in his office.
I should have turned it off.
Yeah. But Bill, we're so guilty of how large is your church, and building it on. Well, they must really want to reach you there. The great pastor ignores his phone. Can you believe that?
Yeah, I just ignored it, but I'll answer it in a minute. I'll find out who it was.
Yeah, but Bill, so often we do that, but the reality is that ministry success in ministry isn't just having, taken a church from, 100 to 1,000. Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that the church, the New Testament church grew. I think that's great. But there's other marks of a church success. First of all, this church is successful at the attendance. I don't know what you guys run, about 100 and
right now we're running in the 80s, 90s range.
Yeah. So it's for it to be there, and for the level of commitment where your finances are 3 times what they were, to rebuild that church back up. Because the average church, people forget, we always think about these large churches, but the average church runs less than 80 in attendance. I mean, that's the average in the United States. So whether we recognize it or not, most of the ministry that's going on is going on from smaller churches. But what God has allowed you to do in this church, and I know this firsthand. This is not just you relating to me. This church has been able to do what a church of 300 is able to do through benevolence. I'm telling you that is an amazing mark of success.
Yeah,
God's hands on you that a lot of times we don't think about. What is the church doing to reach out? Especially, how do you get a church? I don't even know how you did this. A church that comes through what you go through. You know what I'm doing with extra money? I'm banking it, baby. I'm not giving. I am not. I'm telling missions to wait. I'm telling benevolence to wait. I'm like building up. I'm putting it in my barns that I shouldn't be doing. I mean, God's probably looking at me and saying, "Oh, listen, you're saving up, but what are you going to do tonight? I'm taking you."
Right.
But your church, I mean, you didn't even. From what I understand, from what you're saying, that God had given you, He had replaced these people, and it's not a huge church, but when everything is going good and you've got finances coming in, they're not saying, "Hey, let's save up for a rainy day." And there's prudence.
Right.
There's prudence to that, and they took prudent action. I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But they were immediately saying, "Listen, okay, the past is there. Let's be faithful in giving forward." That's an amazing thing. I don't know. I don't know how you were able to, and I know it's the Holy Spirit. I just don't know how you're able to do that unless you are committed. I don't think someone that's here with 2 years does that.
Right.
I think it takes 20 years.
Craig,
to get that.
I couldn't agree with you more. I went through that difficult time struggling, but my neighbors were struggling. Mm-hmm. The people that attended my church were struggling. I'd go into the grocery store and people were hurting and difficulty. And I was at a point there where, like as Craig said, I'd been here, but at that time I'd been here 20 years. 22 years, I guess, in 2008 when it really hit the bottom. And man, I just love Belding, and I love the people of Belding. And that has become a rallying cry in our church. People above the building, people above ourselves. We love people. And we want to bless people, and we want to bless the people of our community, and beyond. Missions has become extremely important in our church. Benevolence, as I said, is just, I can't tell you the amount of times there's been such a tremendous joy in giving and being a blessing to somebody else. It has just been one of the most beautiful things I've ever experienced, and I'm so extremely thankful. But as I was saying, my kids have become involved in ministry here. My grandchildren attend every Sunday.
See, Bill, that's an amazing thing. Now that speaks not only to your long-term commitment here, but also like God granting you great success as a father, and Sharon as a mother, mm-hmm. as a family, because so often we see pastors' kids become very cynical during these times. Yeah. So it's an amazing thing that they didn't become cynical. They doubled down in ministry. And by the way, your kids they have non-church jobs, and they are highly successful.
Yes.
I mean,
God has blessed them.
It's really amazing because they have achieved their what they're doing vocationally. God is blessing them. He is making them the head, not the tail.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for them, I look at that and say, for your children to be in a situation where they saw you perform in such a faithful way and love God, that they would sink their life here, with you. And that they've been doing that for several years.
Yes. Yes.
That's just, I think that, again, that goes back to one of these things that wouldn't happen if it was a 2 or 3 year thing. Because they were here during some good times and they were here during the bad, and they were here. I mean, that's something that I think is really important from a long-term perspective in the community. Those kids were rooted, and they decided to put their lives here too. So it's not just your life; it's their lives.
Right. You mentioned about how God has blessed my kids, and they are very blessed in their vocations. Them and their spouses. God has blessed them all in a wonderful way. But you mentioned something you mentioned the words the head and not the tail. There's a passage of scripture in Deuteronomy, and let me just go right to the source. Right at the tail end of those extremely dark times when we were really struggling, I remember standing in front of the church on a Sunday morning and reading this passage of scripture out of Deuteronomy. And here, great pastor I am, I can't even tell you chapter and verse, but here were the words: you will become the lender and not the borrower. Mm-hmm. Now, we were at a point where we were ready to sell our church because we couldn't think and here I am telling the church we're going to become the lender and not the borrower. And I have seen that come true. Mm-hmm. I have seen people come in here that were destitute, and the church say, here you go, we can help you with that. Mm-hmm. We can bless you. Mm-hmm. And I can't even express. Mm-hmm. I can't even express what kind of feeling that is to become the lender mm-hmm. and not the borrower. It's a great thing. Let me just assure you, it is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Now there's some other things that have built into that. You've got a Christian school over here.
It's not part of our church, but it's a community.
It's connected
right
on
next
your
door.
property, next door.
Right next door.
And you've been able to have your people have been a blessing to the school. The school, a blessing to you. You're a blessing to the school.
Absolutely, it's a mutual blessing.
It is. Yeah. It's worked out real well. Now, there's also something. One of your members here is working with the school to teach them something. You started a community garden, right? And by community. Yeah. It's open to the community. It's different than most community gardens. Most places, most churches do this. Will plow up some areas and then they'll let people come out and do their own.
Right.
You've taken control of the whole situation.
We plant, we do all of that. Yeah. We just let people come and pick.
Well, yeah, but you provide first for the household of the Lord right here.
Yes.
You provide needs for your church family for fresh vegetables and things like that.
Yes.
But there's an overflow. You talk about there's an overflow of that. And you have went out and actually made sure that people outside of your church have, after you've done it here, which is a biblical thing, take care of the household first.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. But then there's such an abundance that God has given you from that you've actually taken it out and given it to many families to help them be a blessing. That's that's something you've taken the. I guess I would say you've been on the offense in terms of ministry, you haven't moved defensively. Everything has been done to move out and to be a minister.
Amen. Right.
And I just find that fascinating. And what I was going to say is one of your members is working, if I understand it right, with the school.
Exactly.
For more of this agricultural stuff, and there's some real opportunities there that in this time when when people need this stuff that you're going to expand that ministry and really have an opportunity to reach out.
Right. We're going to have next year, the church, the school next door is literally busting at the seams. It's just growing wonderfully, and I am so thankful and so happy for them. But next year, we've opened up our church for a couple classrooms, 5th and 6th graders. Will be here at Family Life Center. And part of that experience for them is working in the garden, planting, harvesting, but then being involved in giving that to the community and giving that to those that are around us. And what a tremendous teaching tool for these kids. Craig is exactly right. A man in our church, Marvin Pease, has blessed us in many ways, but especially with this whole idea of allowing this garden, our church garden, to become a blessing to our community, and we're very thankful for that.
That's a big point of interest to me because that's kind of a back to the future thing. it was Christians that developed the whole modern agricultural process. Most people don't realize that, but Christians, churches have always, in fact, the monasteries, there was monasteries that would farm 10 to 50,000 acres. And people forget about that, but it was the Christian community specifically to meet the need, the food needs of first of all their community, and then reaching out, that developed all of that. And so this movement, what you're doing is kind of a back to the future, going back and saying, hey, listen, we want to make sure that that people are fed. And we want to make sure that our people are fed. We want to make sure that people in this community are fed. That I see that kind of a back to the future movement that's being kind of developed there, and that's an amazing thing. Now we're talking right now at the kind of, I don't know if COVID will ever officially. It ended for me. I'm going to tell you the truth. COVID ended for me about 2 months after it started. I blocked it all out. Said this. Well, I'm not going to tell you what I called it because I'm on PentecostalPastor.com. But but anyway, with all of that said, churches shut down. Okay, so your church is cruising. You're doing good.
Yep.
I mean, you're not the mega church, but your church is growing. You're ministering in your community. You're reaching out, and all of a sudden, COVID hits, and there's a lot of churches that had a lot of problems. Tell me a little bit, because this is strange, because you guys couldn't come inside.
Nope.
And now if I'm you, I'm thinking, dear Lord, not again. I can't go through this again. Okay.
Exactly.
But this is what you started some outdoor services like a lot of churches did.
Absolutely. Now this is in Michigan though. And in Michigan in March and April, it's not always pleasant.
Yeah.
And so I have to give some serious props to the worship team and those people that were out in some cold and windy and kind of nasty weather in the months of March and April here in Michigan. But we started outdoor services in our church parking lot. We stationed the worship team underneath the carport, and then the people drove in and they parked in a horseshoe around the carport. And literally, I remember the very first Sunday, Craig, that we did this, it was like there were 80-some people in our parking lot watching an outdoor service. And interestingly enough, many of those people, not many, some of the people had never come to our church before, but their churches were closed. And they came and said, we just want to go to church, And here they are sitting in their cars watching our service, taking part. And many of those families have stayed with us.
So you
have continued
so
on.
your
We've grown
attendance
during COVID.
That's right. Your attendance grew, and not only did your attendance grew, but a lot of churches, faced dwindling offerings because of that. But you guys again,
absolutely,
went up again.
Absolutely, it increased during COVID. Our finances increased during COVID. I think people understood where we'd been, and they'd understood how drastic things had once been, and they just said, no way, devil, you're not doing that to our church. We'll give more.
Yeah.
We'll give above to make sure that everything gets taken care of.
It's an amazing testimony.
It is an amazing thing that what happened here in Belding, Michigan during COVID. Really, seriously, it was amazing.
Yeah.
And still is. Blows me away.
See, I don't think any of, who knows? You can try to unravel that and play the what if game, and that's not the point of our conversation.
Right.
I would just say that it is highly unlikely that if there would have been a series of pastors, if there wasn't a man committed, and I'm not talking about just you, if in any situation, the churches, this has been my experience. Calvin Page, you and I both know Calvin. I grew up with Calvin at Westmore. They had just built a multi-million-dollar church. We're about ready to move. It hadn't even moved in yet. COVID hit. They can't move it. They're not allowed to move into the church. And Calvin's like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And they could not get into the church. It took them 6 or 8 months before they get in. And they went outside. And now Calvin, but here's the thing. Again, you know, you might think this is going to crumble, but the thing is Kelvin's been there 20 years.
Yeah.
And I mean, people, you know, they trusted him. They stayed there. They'd been through thick and thin, and he's like you. There was times when, wow, it was tough. But now his church, but the church grew. I don't think that any church, whether it's this church here, which is a smaller church out in the country, what I would say is kind of a rural area, or his
right.
church, which is, you know, right in the middle of Cleveland. You got Lee University there, you know, it's it's a big area. I don't think either one thrives unless if there had been a whole like 5 pastoral changes in 20 years.
Right.
I just don't think that's going to happen.
No.
There's something that God does. And I'm not saying that it wouldn't. There's some people that come in and God anoints and they do an amazing thing and they're only there for a couple of years. Okay, but I'm talking about generally speaking, in order for these ministries to thrive, whether it's here or whether it's there or whether it's in Houston, Texas or Dallas or
wherever.
you know the biggest. It takes people who are committed to a long period of time, because if there is pastoral turnover, that people can't sink their lives into along with you. Stuff like that doesn't happen.
Right.
And
Right.
So for God, I mean, for the ministry here, I think it's so amazing. And the other thing is that this happens with people who have the gift of pastoring. I will pat you on the back here, Bill. You are an amazing pastor.
Thank you.
You know, and that's a gift. I mean, not everyone who's preaching in churches are pastors.
Right.
Some are phenomenal preachers, but they're not pastors. And you know, I think that, you know, that not only did God give you a heart for a community and love for people, but as a part of that, I guess working together, He gave you that pastor's heart. You cared. I mean, you're a great pastor. I'm like, you got a problem, stop doing it kind of a guy.
Yeah, right.
You know, people tolerate me, but I mean, but with you, it was just, God used you in an amazing way to minister to people pastorally that I think that if you're called to ministry and if you really want to make an impact, I think you have to decide right away, listen, if I'm called to pastor, I'm called to pastor.
Right.
I'm not called to move from church to church and move up.
Right.
I'm called to pastor.
Right.
And it may be that you're here 15 years and go somewhere else. That's not, I'm not talking,
right.
So when I'm talking about long-term pastor, you know, I'm not saying that they have to be here 36 years.
No.
Okay?
No.
You obviously you pastored your first church 2 years and then moved.
Right. Yeah,
okay?
Absolutely.
But your goal was to not move again.
Right. Right.
And I think too many times we as pastors first of all, we look and we judge churches according to size and status and all that stuff. When instead of going where God calls us and saying, the place where God calls me is the highest status place I can be.
Amen.
You know, people aren't going to like this comparison, but I will. I'm going to make a comparison with the Catholic Church. A priest is a priest, no matter where he's at. He could be a priest in a parish of 1,000, or he can be a priest out in the Everglades somewhere,
right.
with nobody around.
Right.
And they are considered ministers of God, worthy of their calling.
Right. Yes.
And I don't want to get into all theology, but I'm just saying that I think in the Pentecostal movement, well, it should be, but I think our guys have got to see they're calling to a community, whatever the size is. If they're called there, that's the ultimate.
Amen.
There's no place to climb from there. That's the
Absolutely,
ultimate.
Craig.
They need to sink their life. They need to be a pastor.
Yeah.
And I don't think everyone can do that, to be honest with you.
You know, it's an extremely difficult thing. And guys, let me just speak to some pastors for a minute. Maybe you've been to your church for a couple years, and you're experiencing some difficulties. Let me make sure you understand that if you move 50 miles away to another church, don't be surprised that the same crazy, ugly things are going to raise their head there. People are people wherever you're at, and your own things that you have to work through will be there wherever you go as well.
Yeah.
We all carry some baggage with us, if I can be so blunt, and we have to get to a point where we're able to weather the storm, weather the difficulty, and say, no, I'm sticking this thing out.
And Bill, let me just, the other thing is that so often when pastors, and I'm going to use me as an example, and I know I'm guilty. In fact, I'm kind of a weird guy. I ended up starting a church because I didn't think that I could fit in anywhere. To be honest with you, I thought the only way I could pastor a church is if I started it, and then that they wouldn't know any better. But which I always felt called to start a church anywhere. But I stayed there 20 years. I mean, that was that's where I wanted to minister. But when you're called to a church, that means you're called to a people. You said you fell in love with the people of Belding.
Yes.
It didn't mean that you were called to Belding and wanted to replace them with the people of Greenville.
Right. No,
too many pastors move and want their people to adjust to them, rather than the pastor saying, "I'm called and I'm going to be a part of this family." And you never tried to change the people of Belding from who they were.
No.
They were.
No.
I mean, you didn't try to turn them into New York people.
Right. Exactly.
Okay?
Correct.
They were. I mean, it was this community is a good community, a hardworking community.
Amen.
But you didn't try to turn them into. I mean, and you said, "I'm going to be a part of this."
Yeah.
Okay. But you didn't say, "I want to come in and turn it." And listen, there's no colleges around here, right? So you didn't come in. Right. I mean, there's some colleges, there's some small, but I mean, but you have to go to Grand Rapids. Or so I don't want to give the idea that but you didn't try to come in and turn this into a college type thing.
Right.
There's no college,
right?
Okay, and that's not that you didn't have highly educated people. It's just that there wasn't,
we did have,
and so you didn't try to make them. You came from a large city.
Yeah.
I mean, you came from a place. You came from the Detroit area, and all that
right.
stuff.
That's where I grew up.
Back then, those were thriving communities. I don't know if anybody wants to look at the map now, but you didn't come in and say, "I want you to be like Pontiac."
Yeah, exactly.
You came here and said, I love the people. I think that was a key. I love the people of Belding.
Amen.
And you didn't try to turn them into the people of Greenville, the people of Grand Rapids. This was not that you didn't have people. You had people from Greenville come over here.
Sure, yeah.
So I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying you weren't trying to turn them into something to fit you and your vision. No. You came in and you let God make the vision of those people.
Right.
That was I don't think again, I keep going back to this, but that's the key. I mean, people become unsatisfied, and it's because they never realize what God. I mean, they say they're called there, but if they're called there, then that's the most important people.
That's right. Craig, couldn't agree with you more. There's a fellow by the name of Steve Green that used to sing a song. A song that's still got a great deal of meaning to me. It says in the song, it just simply says, "People need the Lord."
Yeah.
And there are so many people, wherever you're at, guys, that need Christ, that need Jesus. They need His help. They need His love and affirmation, if you will. People are struggling. People are dealing with a lot of stuff. And as we come, I think, getting closer to a conclusion here, I just want to share an experience. In Belding, our big festival, our big celebration time is Labor Day weekend. Labor Day weekend in Belding is a big deal. I mean, parades and all kinds of things. Big carnival. It's the whole town of Belding is taken over by Labor Day. And I remember being with my family, sitting on the side of the road, getting ready for the Labor Day parade to start. This was probably about 3 years ago. I'm sitting there with my Tiger hat on. By the way, I got my Tiger shirt on today. Sitting there with my Tiger hat on,
That shows you're
And I
led
took-
by the Lord to
Yeah.
support the good teams here.
Yeah,
The Tigers.
support good teams. But anyway, I took a selfie, which I never do. I hate the whole idea of taking selfies, but I took a selfie. And I'm sitting here with my Tiger hat on, sitting on the side of the road in Belding, Michigan. And it just overwhelmed me with how blessed I have become to be a pastor in Belding, Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was just overwhelmed that day. I will not ever forget how overwhelmed I became with the thought, God, you have been so good to me. You've allowed me to pastor here, and the people haven't got rid of me. You know, they've stuck it out with me too, and that's part of it, guys. I mean, it's a mutual love thing. But I recognized then how God had been so faithful to me and answered my prayers when my daughter was a newborn. He said, not only am I going to allow your daughter to go to school, I'm going to allow her kids to start going to the school while you're there. And that's just beyond my imaginations, let me just say.
Well, God's been good. I've been wanting to share your story for a long time because, I really think that the key to, our Pentecostal churches really thriving and being influential in an authentic way, not just saying that we're influential, but actually truly being influential, is by having people that will, God calls them to a place and they put down roots, and they rejoice when the community rejoices, and they weep when the community weeps, and then they go back to the rejoicing again.
Right.
And you're kind of like the prototype. I shouldn't say prototype. You're kind of like you're a good example, and I've seen that. I mean, I've witnessed that over these 30 some years, and marveled at your commitment, your faith, tenacity to do some things because you felt called, and again to see how you worked through that when I know it wasn't easy, and yet you knew that God wanted you here, and you stayed from faithfulness, and it wasn't just like I said, it wasn't just a couple months. You endured for a long time. And then it turned around, and I'm just thankful for ministries like you, and I think they should serve as an example. Whatever size church and whatever community, why are you there? Why are you there? Are you called there? And if you're called there, that is the greatest calling you can have. And maybe at some point God will release you and call you somewhere else. But I would say that from a biblical standpoint and from a historical standpoint, long-term pastorates, Augustine didn't move all over Africa. He stayed where he's at.
Right.
And people forget. They think of him as a theologian, but he was a pastor.
Yeah.
He was a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they sunk their lives into places. So, is there anything you want to share that I hope I haven't went overboard on anything. If anything, I think I've underplayed some things.
Craig, I appreciate your kind words. You've said some very nice things, and I appreciate that. Ministry is people. And as I said, people need the Lord. Ministry is being in my opinion, I still remember Dr. F.J. May looking out at the class and saying to us, you need to go somewhere where it becomes your town. And Belding has become my town.
Yep.
Dr. May, thank you for those wise words years ago. And anyway, I hope that somebody has gotten something out of this. I appreciate it. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, Bill.